Hey, deep divers. Ready for a deep dive into a topic that's out of this world?
Out of this world, literally. Are we talking about aliens?
Well, not quite aliens, but we are talking about astrology.
Ah, astrology. The idea that the stars can somehow tell us about our personalities and predict our futures.
Right, and we've got a whole stack of articles here from you, our listeners, who want to know if there's any truth to it.
Because, let's face it, it's pretty tempting to believe that there's some grand cosmic plan out there for each of us.
It would be kind of comforting in a way, wouldn't it?
It would. But these articles we received don't exactly paint a rosy picture for astrology.
So should we just ditch our horoscopes and forget about Mercury going retrograde?
Well, hold on a second. Before we throw the entire zodiac out the window, let's take a deep dive into the arguments these sources make.
Okay, fair enough. So where do we begin?
Well, one article tells a pretty funny story about an astrologer who had a client with a very unique name.
Let me guess. They did a whole reading based on this person's birth chart, only to find out they had the wrong person entirely.
You got it. It turned out to be a case of mistaken identity, and this really threw the astrologer for a loop.
I can imagine. It would make you question everything you thought you knew. But do you think one isolated incident like that is enough to discredit the entire practice of astrology?
Well, it might depend on who you ask, but this particular story speaks to a broader issue that a lot of these articles bring up.
And what's that?
The lack of a standardized, testable system within astrology. Even experienced astrologers often have wildly different interpretations of the same birth charts and make contradictory predictions.
That's a good point. It's not like there's one official astrology rulebook that everyone follows.
Exactly. And without that consistency, how can you really say whether it's accurate or not?
It's like that time Oprah had an astrologer on her show, and he told the whole audience that, as this astrological sign, they all shared certain personality traits.
And everyone was amazed because he described them perfectly.
Yeah, but when you actually think about it, those descriptions could apply to almost anyone, right?
Exactly. And that right there is a major psychological factor at play. It's called the Barnum effect. We as humans have this tendency to believe that general descriptions apply specifically to us.
So it's not necessarily that the stars are influencing us, but rather our brains are tricking us into seeing connections where there might not be any.
You got it. And there's another psychological phenomenon that comes into play here as well. Confirmation bias.
Ah, yes, confirmation bias, that sneaky little tendency we all have to favor information that confirms what we already believe.
Precisely. It's like how some people only remember the times their horoscope was accurate and conveniently forget all the times it was way off.
So we've got the Barnum effect, confirmation bias.
Yeah,
Are we starting to see a pattern here?
we might be. But it's not just our brains that seem to complicate things. There are scientific arguments against astrology as well.
Okay, I'm listening. Hit me with the science.
All right, well, one article discusses this massive study comparing the lives of over 2,000 twins.
Twins. So like identical twins separated at birth.
Exactly. And they wanted to see if there were any significant personality differences between twins raised apart who would have grown up under different astrological influences versus those raised together.
And what did they find?
Well, the study concluded that there was no correlation between the twins' astrological signs and their personalities.
So basically, your astrological sign doesn't have any more influence over your personality than just chance.
That's what the study suggests. And if that's the case, then what are we left with?
It does make you wonder, doesn't it?
It does, but several of these articles suggest an interesting alternative. Maybe astrology is less about concrete predictions and more about personal interpretation.
Oh, I see. So it's more of a tool for self-reflection than a crystal ball for the future.
Exactly, and that perspective resonated with a lot of folks online. Like on Reddit, for example, some users were saying they view astrology as a way to spark introspection rather than dictate their destiny.
That makes sense. It's kind of like looking at an abstract painting.
Yeah.
You might see different things in it than someone else, and that's okay.
It is. And for some people, astrology provides a framework for understanding themselves and the world around them, even if that framework is more symbolic than scientific.
That's actually a really interesting point. It's not necessarily about taking it literally, but more about using it as a tool for personal growth.
Right. And on top of all that, there's also the historical context to consider.
You mean like the fact that astrology has been around for centuries?
Exactly. And even if it's not scientifically accurate, it's still a fascinating part of human history and culture. In fact, one article argued that ancient astrologers, even though they were working with a limited understanding of the universe, still made significant strides in fields like astronomy and mathematics.
So maybe their hearts were in the right place, even if their methods were a little off.
You could say that. And some people argue that we wouldn't have modern science without those early attempts to make sense of the cosmos, as flawed as they might have been.
So you're saying following the stars, even if it was for the wrong reasons, accidentally put us on the path to actual science.
That's a fascinating thought, isn't it?
It really is. It's like something out of a movie.
Well, if you're looking for a movie-worthy example, look no further than Johannes Kepler.
Johannes Kepler, the astronomer.
The one and only, the guy who figured out the laws of planetary motion.
Wait, are you telling me he was into astrology too?
Believe it or not, he started his career as an astrologer.
Whoa, for real? So he was trying to figure out how to make more accurate horoscopes and ended up revolutionizing our understanding of the universe.
You got it. His pursuit of astrological knowledge ultimately led him to question the prevailing geocentric model. You know, the idea that Earth was the center of the universe.
Which, spoiler alert, it's not.
Definitely not. And thanks to Kepler's work, we now have a much better grasp on the cosmos.
That's pretty wild. But even if astrology played a role in early scientific discoveries, there's still the issue of its scientific validity today. Like, how do astrologers explain the fact that the gravitational pull of the planets is minuscule compared to, say, the moon?
Ugh. Ah, yes, the gravitational pull conundrum. Well, one article put it in a pretty hilarious way. They said that if we're talking about physical influence, your toaster probably has a stronger gravitational pull on you than Mars does.
Okay, wait, seriously. My toaster has more influence over my destiny than an entire planet.
Well, according to basic physics, yeah. Obviously, it's a bit of a simplification, but it does highlight the point that those cosmic influences astrologers talk about are pretty tiny.
Okay, I have to admit, that's a pretty funny analogy. But I'm sure astrologers have some kind of counter-argument to that, right? They don't just accept that their entire belief system is less influential than a kitchen appliance.
You're right, they do. Some argue that it's not about literal gravitational pull. They say astrology is more about symbolism and interpretation, not so much about physical forces.
I see. So it's more about the meaning we ascribe to those celestial bodies than their actual impact on our lives.
Exactly. But even if we set aside the science for a moment, there's still the issue of consistency within astrology itself. Like we talked about earlier, there's no one definitive system that all astrologers agree on.
Right, like that example from one of the articles about the French astrologer who thought everyone born on the same day should have the same personality.
Yeah, because the sun returns to the same position in the sky each year on that date.
But that kind of ignores a teensy little detail, doesn't it?
A teensy little detail, like the fact that the Earth itself is also moving through space.
Bingo. So even if the sun appears in the same spot in our sky on, say, January 1st, our planet is actually in a completely different position in its orbit around the sun compared to where it was on July 1st.
Exactly. So that whole argument about everyone born on the same day having the same astrological influences kind of falls apart when you factor in Earth's own movement.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder how astrologers explain stuff like that. And speaking of things that make you wonder, what about all those new planets astronomers keep discovering?
You mean like Uranus and Neptune?
Yeah. Those weren't part of traditional astrology, were they? So how did they get added to the mix? Did astrologers have a sudden epiphany? It's almost like they're playing catch-up with science.
Kind of, yeah. Take Neptune, for example. Astronomers only discovered it in the 19th century because of its gravitational effects on Uranus.
So it wasn't like astrologers were saying, hey, there's something fishy going on with Uranus. There must be another planet out there messing with it.
Nope, they had no clue. It wasn't until astronomers actually found Neptune that astrologers decided to incorporate it into their charts.
That's interesting. It does make you think. If astrology is really so in tune with the cosmos, shouldn't it have been aware of Neptune all along?
It's a fair question, for sure.
But even with all these questions about its validity, I can see why people are still drawn to astrology. It's kind of comforting to think that there's this bigger picture out there, you know?
Absolutely. And that seems to be a recurring theme in these articles. Like, Even if the science doesn't totally add up, astrology can still provide a sense of meaning and purpose.
Right, like that one commenter on Reddit who said they use astrology as a tool for self-reflection.
Exactly. For them, it's less about predicting the future and more about understanding their own strengths and weaknesses.
It's kind of like a cosmic mirror, in a way.
I like that. And other commenters were talking about how astrology can provide a sense of belonging and connection.
Because it gives them a shared language to talk about their experiences and relate to others who share their sign.
Exactly. It creates a sense of community,
When you put it that way, it kind of reminds me of those personality tests everyone loves to take.
like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram.
Yeah. People might debate whether those tests are scientifically sound, but they still provide a framework for understanding yourself and others.
It's all about finding frameworks that resonate with us, even if those frameworks are more about personal interpretation than objective truth.
It's like we're hardwired to seek out patterns and explanations, even if those explanations aren't always rooted in hard science.
Absolutely. And maybe that's part of what makes us human.
Well, deep divers, it seems like we've explored a whole universe of ideas in this deep dive into astrology.
We really have. And while we may not have all the answers, I think we can all agree that it's a topic that sparks a lot of curiosity and debate.
Absolutely. So the next time you check your horoscope, maybe take it with a grain of cosmic dust.
But don't be afraid to appreciate the sense of wonder and connection it brings.
Beautifully said. Until next time, deep divers, keep those minds open and those questions coming.